Like clockwork, Yellowstone's Old Faithful has been wowing crowds now for more than a century. Congress established its National Park Service back in 1916, and 100 years later, preserving the footprints of natural history remains a top priority.
How it's gone from telling the stories of the great landscapes of places like Yellowstone to telling America's story.
From inside America's first national park, Yellowstone's narrative, like its landscape, remains largely untouched. From its geothermal wonders to the majesty of wildlife, for all its natural beauty found along paved roads, Yellowstone's legacy may live just beyond the reach of our own 2 feet. Ralph Johnson's horseback tours wind through the land he was born and raised, tucked along the northern edge of Yellowstone.
That is Hanlon Hill.
Ralph's the kind of guy who never found much use for things like GPS.
That is the Pine Creek Divide.
The journeys on horseback harken back to the original way Yellowstone revealed itself, one gallop at a time.
You do not hardly see a fraction of Yellowstone Park looking through a windshield. The real deal is what we are, and that's why we have not changed over the past 60, 70 years.
And it's really a place that you can count on for us to preserve in its natural state and to really minimize man's imprint on this landscape. And I think that's something that generations to come can count on, that we're going to preserve this place unimpaired for future generations.
Okay, right here. That's good.
The national park system is often called America's best idea, and those looking to preserve that idea say a deep respect for the past will open the path to new ideas for the future.
Centennial is really a way to highlight not only where we've been, but more importantly, where we're going.
And it's why every week this summer we're giving you an inside look at our national parks. Far beyond what our eyes can see, our journeys will examine the hearts of the people who make these places truly special. Inside America's Parks, I'm Andy Choi for The Now. Mention the name Gettysburg and you might think of some of the darkest pages in American history. But standing here on these hallowed grounds is the living history of Gettysburg National Military Park, and it's what keeps the emotion of this battlefield alive.
Shell, 1,200 yards, ready! You actually feel you're back in time and you're part of this actual battle. Fire!
In the silhouette of cannon fire, shades of 1863 rest on the shoulders of men looking to turn back time.
You kind of get a flashback aspect of what kind of men actually did this. You know, what kind of men actually walked into death.
Fire! Load! We're not only representing Civil War soldiers, but we're representing, in this group, our ancestors. If you're too far back, that muzzle flash is going to happen.
For Jamie Lupton, Gettysburg is part of the family legacy on the same field his great-great-grandfather served.
It's a single-shot weapon.
The history teacher now aims to educate
Trail arms.
as a living historian.
You know, we do wear the uniforms, we do walk in their shoes in a sense. Right wheel, march.
And walking in those shoes becomes an instant education in sacrifice.
Left, left.
Good.
I think I got it.
You had to do it in a certain procedure, as you saw, Andy.
This is extremely intimidating, just the moves.
You had to learn all this,
Get your percussion cap out of there.
and you had a relatively short period of time.
Fire!
Oh!
But hopefully in some way, shape, or form, we can kind of make it come to life a little bit.
Fire!
My parents brought me here when I was in 2nd grade, and I loved it. Actually, I think the first thing I remember seeing on the battlefield were cannons. And I was like, oh man, cannons, I love that. But here at the Battle of Gettysburg, they're going to be used long distance.
That love for Gettysburg only got stronger in young Jared Foose.
It's one thing to read in a book that this regiment moved across the field and it looked like this, but it's another thing to actually see. So the command ready? Go ahead and break open the powder charge.
It's why the lessons here capture more than just the wonder of youth.
I would say it's the emotion of the landscape.
Jared says Gettysburg speaks to the soul.
Because whoever comes to this battlefield, regardless of who they are, what they're thinking, what their story is, in some way they're going to connect with the emotion.
That's the last full measure of what they give for our freedom. These guys were fighting for something that they seriously and heavily believed in.
Like you're walking across that Pickett's Charge field, you know, in the evening time by yourself with no other people around. Then it starts to really sink in, you know, what these men did here and the sacrifice they made.
In his famous Gettysburg Address, President Lincoln said the world may not remember his words, but it must never forget what happened here.
The world did remember those words, and every year more than 1 million visitors come to Gettysburg from all over the globe. Inside America's Parks, I'm Andy Choi for The Now.
When you're far beyond the scenes of life's matinee, the bright lights of youth may seem like a distant, grainy memory. But Betty Reed Soskin hopes her second act pays homage to the first.
Because the history as I had lived it was nowhere in sight.
Barely in her 20s during World War II, Betty worked on the home front as a clerk in a Jim Crow segregated union hall.
Because that's who we were in 1942. Which was the reason I had never identified with Rosie the Riveter.
Today, Betty plays a pivotal role at the Rosie the Riveter National Historical Park in Richmond, California, Betty's Bay Area hometown.
This is not a case of personal achievement.
As America's oldest national park ranger at age 94,
that is how fast the time goes.
Betty's deeply personal presentation examines how history can often carry conflicting truths.
Because what gets remembered is determined by who's in the room doing the remembering.
It's really Betty and her personality at 94 years old, that she delivers a message that we don't hear too often.
I know that I'm now telling my story from inside the circle, where when I was 20, I was outside the circle, and these kids are outside the circle.
Yeah, because my perspective on life is totally different. I'm woman, I'm black, I'm Muslim. It's just so different from maybe someone else that's sitting next to me that may be of a different color, different race, a different ethnicity.
Social change continues to radiate out.
Through the wisdom of Ranger Betty Reed Soskin, generations past and present are learning a life far from Rosie can be just as riveting. Inside America's Parks.
Thank you for coming.
I'm Andy Choi for The Now.
Just across these waters is the oldest national park east of the Mississippi, but you can't come to Acadia without appreciating Maine's main course.
They've been very good to me.
For 43 years,
Sometimes that can get a little colorful.
Bruce Fernald has seen every crustacean crawl into his traps off the coast of Maine.
You guys saw in the traps today coming up, and some of them are right full.
Probably about a 5 or 6 pound lobster.
It keeps getting better every year that I've been fishing.
But not every lobster catch is worth keeping.
Well, the abundance is from all of our conservation measures, especially on the coast of Maine. We have done more for conservation than most any other fishery.
This makes it. No, it's too short. Yeah, so this is going back in the water.
From strict measuring standards to notching lobster tails loaded with eggs, there's a science behind the strategy.
For the next generation, after generation, they want lobsters on the bottom.
But she has a wider tail flared out to hold more eggs.
We do a lot to keep them there.
We need good quality science in order to make good management decisions about Acadia for the future. And so our mission is to protect this place in an unimpaired condition.
That dedication to science is just as important on land. Acadia National Park Science Day gives visitors a chance to go beyond the jaw-dropping aesthetics of Cadillac Mountain or look past the clarity of Jordan Pond, all to find out how these parks are truly living laboratories.
I mean, people come to national parks and they want to learn. Kids want to learn. And so we see a strong appetite for people wanting to learn about science and learn more about what they're seeing.
The understanding of nature behind that beautiful scenery is something that we should all understand.
Look at the view that I look at every day, and a lot of it is the park.
That connection between land and sea runs deep for Bruce Fernald, and as a sixth-generation lobsterman, connecting the past helps this jagged coastline honor its treasures for the future.
Yeah, I always think about it. I think about both my father and grandfather and great-grandfather fishing in the same places I did. And, when I'm there, I'm thinking of those guys. It's a good connection.
3 million people are set to visit Acadia National Park this year, and if generations to come are to follow suit, conservation must be top of mind. Inside America's Parks, I'm Andy Choi for The Now. Looking over these cliffs back in 1880, anthropologist Adolphe Bandelier called this the grandest thing he ever saw. Here in New Mexico, Bandelier National Monument is a promise to the Pueblo people to preserve a place they once called home.
And just kind of imagining how things were when the Native Americans lived here.
These structures stood more than 600 years ago. This was a thriving community for the ancestral Pueblo, with multi-story homes tucked along these canyon walls, complex in its network of families, simple in their way of life.
So this would be a place to store food?
Well, it might be.
Ranger Chris Johnson says part of the mystique with Bandelier comes from rebuilding these structures with your mind, figuring out exactly how the Pueblo people thrived for generations.
Super small in here.
Because it was really simple. They really just had the clothes on their back, possibly the shoes that they had woven, and food. That's pretty much it. They don't have all the crazy nonsense we have today.
You'll notice the dwellings are made out of volcanic material, and it's why the ceilings here are black. This is soot intentionally put up to keep the ash from crumbling.
Because it's so soft relatively, you get all these miscellaneous holes all along the cliffs, and then at the base of the cliffs, where it was practical to live, they could dig it out to make a larger room.
No one knows for sure why the Pueblo eventually left these canyons, but the concept of home remains a solid foundation for every new visitor.
So we hope that they'll go home and say, yeah, that's a place worth protecting. That's a place I want to go again. That's a place I want my grandkids to be able to go.
Several Pueblo communities today formally recognize Bandelier as the place their direct ancestors once thrived. It's a place deep with family connections and a place that draws 250,000 visitors every year. Inside America's Parks, I'm Andy Choi for The Now.